profound and
wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered even in 100 million kalpas. Having it to hear, accept, and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning. Welcome to a rainy Sunday at virtual Stone Creek. At least you won't get wet. I find I'm nervous in a way that I haven't been in years. Often I'm nervous during the zazen before a talk, and then it all settles down. And this time it's because it's so new and different. So I'm a little bit tense. So now with all of us sheltering at home, I wondered what would be relevant. And I turned to something that I had been thinking about for some time, and that's a talk on meaning and purpose. So we tend to live in terms of purpose and productivity, and so much of our productive activity or purposeful activity is cut off. And so we can't know ourselves in terms of our productivity anymore, nor can we occupy our days with all of this productivity, except through computer and home affairs, and we really need to not identify with our computers. So purpose is one of the prime ways to give or create meaning. And productivity should be its handmaiden, but it tends to take over instead. What is this? It actually doesn't look like it. It's a clock. So what's it for? It's for telling time. So now that a thing has a purpose attached to it, it makes what we call sense. It makes sense to us. It's not just an anonymous box. And so purpose and productivity get conflated to our loss because they're quite different. And especially maybe now, maybe always, the differences are really important. So productivity is a measure. It's a tape measure, a large one. It's a measure of activity, of producing products. And all that prodding, the producing of the products is a focus on things, on making and consuming things, on wanting and yearning for things. And the whole economy relies on us to be good consumers, which is why it's in such trouble now. And it leads to identifying with your productivity or your lack of productivity equally, and equally with the products you live with. We know ourselves and identify ourselves to others through the products we live with. And this is a major source of suffering and alienation. And the focus of being productive turns us into tools, making and using the products. And so we become a measure of a measure. It's a thin way to live. I think we all realize this, but I don't think we take it into account enough in our lives. How much we're driven by being productive and by being surrounded by products. And when that's cut off, we're adrift. Who are you when you're not productive in your usual way? And there's an urge to compensate with lots of at-home projects. Has everybody made a list of all the things they can get done while they're at home? Even the New York Times has taken this up, about how this is not a good time to be making those lists about how productive you ought to be. Because it's a stressful time, and the busyness becomes an added stress upon the other stress. So the message about not stressing yourself over lists of at-home projects is a good one, but of course it's the tip of the iceberg. The other 90% of the stressfulness, the being derailed from our usual activities, and the fear the pandemic is up. We fear we are not who we thought we were. And there's financial fear, which is a fear of the future, and the fear of illness and death for people near us on the front lines in New York, Purpose is deeper than productivity. Purpose is one of the ways we assign or create or identify meaning in our lives. It's what we do this for. So its purpose is a statement of our values. Unfortunately, one of our main purposes in the consumer culture is to be that good consumer and to reassure ourselves through our things that we are safe, that we're loving, that we're valuable. But we have larger purposes that can give aim and direction to our lives. So purposes are vital, but they are easily hijacked. Wanting to be what I'm not and focusing on goals, which by definition are not how things are now. And so they easily become a critique of the present rather than a way to know ourselves. Purpose is valuable when it's deep and wide like a river, when it reminds us and directs us toward what matters most to us. And it's a prime way we figure out what matters. Only don't leave it languishing in the future. Purpose is nourishing when it is about two things: what I value and how I envision enacting my values now over the course of my life. And purpose has a large shadow, as it easily gets reduced to productivity. And from that, we reduce to being tools ourselves, which all drain the present of its depth and its flavor. And they turn us away from the real present towards something else, presumably better, somewhere else, some other time. In our Zen practice, for example, if we practice for some goal, enlightenment, anyone? Then our present actual life, the only one we have, is about something off stage, a fantasy, an idea of something, but not a reality. So why then do we live caught up in productivity so much, in unexamined or unreal purposes? Well, we've been trained into it, trained into productivity. And it's true of people everywhere, but it's particularly true in America. It's such a foundational aspect of our whole society that we must be purposeful, productive, and busy, hardworking. Meaning includes purpose, but it's bigger. It's the sea that holds the waters of the river of purpose. And if you look hard at what it means to be, or to be you, or to be you now, you find that you have to create meaning. Not all on your own. Politics, philosophy, the Buddha Dharma, Western religions, they all offer possible narratives of meaning. And so much is inherited. Much of our personality and consciousness, drives, impulses are native to us. They're inherited not only from our parents, but from our hominin ancestors, for good and for ill. But it's up to you to create or affirm meaning, to fit it to you, or fit you to it. It takes careful thought and attention. And it can feel uncomfortable to create the shape of meaning in your life. To say, this matters to me, and that not so much. And to know why. And then to say, how do I live in terms of this matters? Of course, you don't do it in isolation. We have the Buddha Dharma, your education, your families, your friends, reading, society, they all contribute hugely. Circumstances, as we're all so aware of right now, are a huge factor. Does the circumstances of the pandemic and being both fearful and pressed into staying home, do they change your sense of your purpose of your life or the meaningfulness of being you? Most likely. But at heart, you have some measure of choice about what will be meaningful to you. So meaning and purpose have to contend not only with being at home in the coronavirus pandemic, but also with the end of humanity, the end of the universe, the end of stars and galaxies. The universe is expanding, and it will eventually use up or dissipate all its energy. Eventually, there'll be complete dissolution even at the level of protons and neutrons. Now that's safely in what they say is a 10 trillion years. Much sooner, the sun will go out, will extinguish, 100 billion years. And life on Earth will likely be gone a very long time before that, because as the sun diminishes, it will become harder and harder for creatures to live on Earth. Also, far in the future. But it's true. And does death make life meaningless? As we will all die long before the sun winks out? Does all of this make your life meaningless? Or the opposite? Precious, like that sea turtle coming up for air in the middle of the ocean, poking its head up through a floating wooden ring. That's the classic Buddhist image of the rare preciousness of human life. It is that rare to be born a person. And I came across a beautiful description of how space and time work it was a beautiful statement. And we can find ourselves in this one. So it says, time is no more fixed than the stars. Time speeds and bends around planets and suns, is different in the mountains than in the valleys, and is part of the same fabric as space, which curves and swells as does the sea. Objects, whether planets or apples, fall or orbit, not because of a gravitational energy, but because they plummet into the silky folds of space-time, into ripples on a pond. So that's where we live. And where all this wonder and life and meaning take place is the present, only the present. The present doesn't shrink because our field of vision and of activity shrinks. And so while purpose focuses on the future, meaning is naturally and inevitably present-based. So the present does not shrink. The field of meaning does not shrink unless we allow ourselves to be shrunk by shrinking circumstances. And so I found a koan in our Zen treasury about this. A monk inquired of Master Kan Feng, saying, Buddhas in all 10 directions have one straight road to nirvana. I wonder where that one road is. And Kan Feng held up her stick, her kotsu, this teaching stick, drew a line in the air, and said, here it is. So this koan is the last one in the Mumon Kan, the Gateless Gate, one of our great Zen koan classic treasuries. And Kan Feng was a Chinese Zen master, a disciple of Tongshan. And Tongshan is the first of the Soto line. And so Kan Feng is his disciple, one of his disciples. And this koan is very much in the Soto family style, being focused in the present. And of course, in the koan collection, a Kan Feng is a man, and historically, undoubtedly male, since misogyny is ancient, but we're moving to a more truly inclusive Zen. So for today, Kan Feng is a woman. Buddhas in all 10 directions have one straight road to nirvana. I wonder where that road is. So 10 directions are all the directions throughout the universe, all of space, all around, up and down, in every possible direction, as far as there can be in the universe. And all these Buddhas everywhere have just one straight road to walk. Now, the monk has heard this, then accepts it, but he doesn't begin to understand it. And knowing that, he bravely ventures a question. Where could this road be? Where else is there besides now? And since space and time are interdependent, they're the same reality viewed from two different perspectives. If you look at the world in terms of space, we call it interdependence. You look at the world in terms of time, we call it impermanence. It's one world and one reality. This same reality, there's nowhere else, and there's no other time. This is it. This is life. This is reality. It's not just the time of the coronavirus. But the monk is oblivious of that because his head is full of ideas of nirvana and ideas of getting somewhere. He wants earnestly, he's quite sincere, he wants earnestly to know how to go toward nirvana. And what is the road of practice to get there? Getting there is, reminds me a whole lot of getting, grasping, and more. So what is nirvana if it's not somewhere else and some other time? So the monk, like most people, imagined that nirvana is a heavenly realm. It must be somewhere else because this is no heavenly realm. So what then is nirvana? Well, it's not a place. We envision in terms of place because we have these bodies that like to know where they are in space. But it doesn't make nirvana a place or unreal. So I knew it wasn't a place when I was a kid, because when I was a kid growing up in New York City, my subway stop was a dusty, bare concrete and metal platform with a big sign that announced its name, Bliss Street. And there was no Bliss Street. I looked around the neighborhood. There was no Bliss Street. So clearly, this realm of that they called bliss was not nirvana. But nirvana is neither a place nor unreal. Nirvana originally means extinguished, like a flame blown out. When the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion are extinguished, that's nirvana. When we extinguish the gap or separation or aversion between ourselves and others, then there's no greed because nothing is separate. Then there's no hatred because nothing is disowned. And there's no delusion because separation is the core delusion. When for however long or short a time, and you see, we get caught right up in measuring. Nirvana isn't long or short or near or far. When, for however a time, we are free from these fires and this prison cell of opposition, that's nirvana. That's peace. But we think, okay, and that's not how I am now. So nirvana or peace must be somewhere else, which right exactly at that moment creates the division, separation, opposition, right there. Right there, we create samsara. Samsara is the realm or life of greed, hatred, and delusion. And it is rooted in that artificial division separating me from you. Going back to that sense of getting there, getting to nirvana, getting enlightenment, that's about more and about not this. Greed, which is more, is necessarily about the future. It's about what is not now that we want. It is not real, except as the deep suffering it causes, the suffering it creates in the present. On the other side, there's less is more. Dogen talks about less is more in his very last essay to his monks before he left Eheji to go seek treatment for the illness that killed him while he was away seeking treatment. Less is more is Thoreau's life on Walden Pond. And imperfect, they say, as they say, he took his laundry home for his mother to wash, but he didn't stay there every moment, but he settled himself there and found deep, lifelong lessons in what was there. We don't have to be perfect to do this. Less is more also reminds me of the paintings of Agnes Martin, a favorite of mine, who is described as a minimalist. Her paintings are large squares, usually, with very faint washes of color in pale blue, maybe pale yellow, maybe gray, maybe one or two of those colors, and many lines or bands of color, sometimes crossing each other, going across. So people called her minimalist, and she said to her last dying breath, "No, I'm not a minimalist. I'm a romantic. These are paintings of emotion." But she expressed them in a less is more form that helped her contain her, some ways, chaotic life. These Thoreau, Agnes Martin, these are practices of vulnerability. Less is more is vulnerability, not control. And in this time of staying put at home, we have notably less control over our lives. We've been controlled to stay home. And I think this less control is a big part of the disorientation people feel, as we usually think we control our lives, and that we make choices and act on them freely. And a lot of that is illusion, but we like to ignore that because we identify with ourselves as these beings of agency. We have agency, but our agency is always limited and shaped by circumstances. It's just now we're especially aware of this. And one of the prime ways we try to exert control is more. Wanting more, striving for more, is an attempt to control our circumstances and our future. It's an attempt to feel safe, but it doesn't work because grasping does not create security. It creates its opposite. It creates the need for even more. It's a self-fulfilling bad prophecy. So Master Confeng takes pity on the monk. She doesn't tell him to get lost or to quit spinning castles in the air. Instead, she answers him very directly. She holds up her stick, draws a line in the air, or a line in the air, or a line in the air, and says, "Here it is." She said, "The line, here it is," not the stick. The line doesn't go anywhere. The line can be a line, what we call a circle, can be an arc. It's a line that is this very moment place. This is the time and place of practice. This is the time and place of awakening. This is the time and place of all life. Now, this doesn't mean ignoring the future or the past. They're both critically important. In fact, if we paid more attention to the past, we might not be in quite such a bad situation in this country in the pandemic, because there have been so many others before. The very word quarantine comes from the 40 days seclusion or isolation forced upon some people like Turkey or the Near East from one of the plagues. So past and future are critically important, even though we actually can't know either, really. So the mistake we make is that we focus on the past and future, so the present is a barely noticed sliver. The past and future are alive now and only now. Does the past live on its own? No. Only as we sift and interpret and include it in the present. And the future is alive only now. What we do now is the ground from which the future springs. Rather than sacrificing the present on the altar of an idea of tomorrow, we can make every effort to include past and future in our present. That way, the future is real and juicy and alive. So Kanfeng draws a line in the air to say, now, here is where we live, where we practice, where we awaken. Here, now, is where we practice as bodhisattvas concerned about the welfare of all beings. Here, now, is where we love and where we sorrow. Don't get hung up on the line, whether it's a line, a circle, or an arc. They're all lines. So the road to nirvana is the road of being fully present to what is here. It's open, it's curious, it's creative, it's the ground under your feet. So nirvana isn't just a state of mind. It's a state of being, a state of body and mind, of heart and reason. It's a state of your hands and your eyes. It's the whole planet right here, since the ground under your feet is the one ground of the whole planet, no separation. We are each of us, living in the true world, the world of nirvana as the peace of no separation, no three poisons, all inclusion. We mostly don't know this. We're unaware, but the opportunity to be aware is always right here, not somewhere else. So rather than feeling discouraged at being far from nirvana, know that you are already here in what Katagiri called Buddha's world, and can return home and open your life into this moment and respond to what is here. Moment after moment, forgetting and returning. While I was working on this talk, I had a dream. It was a couple of nights ago. And what I didn't recall it until I got back to work on the talk the next day. And it came right back to me. I was standing with my arms wide outstretched, addressing a group of people in that case, they were real people. They were not faces on the screen. They were you, though. I was standing addressing a group and saying in a big, happy voice, yes, all of this, right now, is absolute reality. This, how each thing really is in itself, is absolute reality. We're all here together. We all belong. We all matter. But by the time I woke up that morning, very early, I was anxious and unhappy, which is what had woken me up at like 4:30 in the morning. I felt constrained, frustrated, and sad. Oh, I said to myself, don't forget to include this side in your talk. So gradually, I let myself feel the sadness of the time. And I couldn't help feeling the stress of it. So I spent time with Elska with great gratitude for her company. Having someone nearby is a great gift for those of us who have it. I got up and I exercised because my body liked that a lot. My body doesn't care about the pandemic. It is not really interested. It wants to move. And then I went back to work on this talk, which brought me closer to all of you and closer to the Dharma. So thank you. So how do we handle questions and comments, or do we want to switch instead to the breakout groups? How do you want to handle this?
What we did last week was we had about 5 minutes of questions and comments. And Jisho, you were reminding me, if people, you can either unmute yourself with the finding the little microphone icon, or you can, if you're on a computer, you can just hit the space bar and temporarily unmute yourself if you have something to say.
Hold the space bar down.
Yeah,
So
that's what I'm doing right now. I'm holding it down while I'm talking, and then as I let it go, I'll be muted again. And then and then remute yourself, just so there's not a lot of background noise when others are asking questions or comments.
Jisho, can you hear me?
yes, hi, John.
I just have to say, this was a profound discussion for me personally. I mean, emotionally, very emotionally, because I've been practicing, I guess, for about 7 years. And all along there was that, issue of nirvana, enlightenment. And I've been constantly going over that, saying, what does that mean? And how come I'm not there? And how do I get there? And I've always felt that I was strictly an amateur practicing, Soto Zen. I never felt that I was doing it right. And, I just have to keep practicing and reading books. But after this lecture, it was an awakening. Suddenly I get it. I can't thank you enough, because it just lifts such a weight off my shoulders with my practice. And I just can't thank you enough. It was really, really great to do this, especially now with all the stress of the pandemic. And at my age, I'm really concerned because we're at the danger zone. So anyway, I just had to tell you that was really wonderful, wonderful, and thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, John.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Susan.
Yeah. I was thinking about everything I try to do at this stage in my life is consider everything as practice. And this time has been that on steroids. And there's this, I'm barely wrapping my mind around that uji, that being time of Dogen. I'm trying to understand that, but I'm calling this practice time because it's all practice, and it's actually an opportunity that maybe no one would ask for, but in the end, to be grateful for that, for it to be practice time, every bit of it. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a form of Zendo. It's an enclosure, and we can hold that enclosure in many different ways, and that's a great one.
Hi, Jisho, thank you so much for your talk.
Hi, Tom.
It was very timely for me as well. I woke up this morning with Macbeth's Tomorrow soliloquy.
Creeping at a steady pace.
Yes. Just so, and sitting with the some of the things that you spoke to in your talk, and then there's this old proverb. Some tea comes with those little sayings on it.
Yeah.
This was one of those. It says it's an old Chinese proverb, and I wonder if you think it might be connected in some way. I'd love to hear your thought. A bird doesn't sing because it has the answer. It sings because it has a song.
There are birds that ask questions, like the crow that says, is this a good twig to make a hook out of? But by and large, they're living in the present and taking care of that present and listening to each other's songs. They listen closely. The chickadee, this is my latest bird discovery, is that the chickadee has about 40 different calls as opposed to its song that say different things. And other birds listen closely to the calls of the chickadee in order to be alerted to what's going on. And the thing I discovered that one thing about this was that one of the chickadees calls, when the chickadee sees a large, potentially dangerous animal, it says, chickadee dee dee dee. We think that's its name, but that's its name for us. So how about changing the Macbeth from tomorrow, rewrite it into today and today, rewrite it for yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jisho, for your beautiful talk. In these times, it's clear how oriented we are to consuming, the economy, not only buying stuff, but the way we spend our time and often the way we try to find meaning. I'm also reminded of a book I read many years ago by Trungpa, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, that ability of our ego to really co-opt spiritual principles and spiritual ideals. So I think it's important in terms of meaning to, distinguish between our aspirations from a holy point of view versus, consuming and making money. And so I was curious if you had any suggestions there, because it can be difficult to sort of hone in on that.
I think the title was brilliant. The book was interesting and explained it, but the title itself is like a handle you can return to. Do we not all engage in spiritual materialism? And in some way, turning our spiritual practice into a thing for our personal benefit, or something to get, or something to look good from, or all those other kinds of things. So I think, remember, I like the title of that book so much that I just let that be the reminder to keep an eye out for something that's a danger for all of us. We all do it. It's not even just a danger. We all engage in it. And rather than, the nice thing also with that is not to turn away to be embarrassed about it. Just accept that we all have a tendency to get grabby and materialistic and consumerist with our spiritual practice, and that we can afford to look at it.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Jisho, I have a question.
Okay, Dean.
How do you realize nirvana without reaching for it?
It is the happening of what happens when you open the hands of your grasping. There is nothing to reach for. It's the opening of the hands. It's the opening of the hand of greed, the opening of the hand of hatred, the opening of the hand of delusion, of the opening and letting go for that moment. And that itself is where nirvana flowers as that. There's nothing to reach for. There's the opening, our act of opening ourselves over and over.
Just keep practicing.
That'll do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Jisho,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for another incredible talk. These talks have been amazing lifesavers. It strikes me that both the dream of your arms extended and exercising your body were precisely what you're talking about. In those moments, you were fully just doing that, right? Extending your arms in your dream and then listening to your body and going and exercising. And could you speak about that? There was nowhere to go, but you were present enough to understand what you were experiencing.
Right. The difficulty is that I was also present enough to know I was stressed and unhappy, frustrated and constrained, right? And I thought I've got to bring that in, that there's that time too. And when that is my present, I have to dwell there, acknowledge it, and relate to it. If I just turn away, I'm going to be carrying that sort of a heartburn all day. So I have to address it.
Do you think that's related to us putting values and judgments like, oh, this is a good thing. Like now I'm really practicing and getting somewhere. And oh, this is my flawed, icky human self that I'm trying to get over. So
Right.
this isn't really good. So it's that sort of ongoing dialogue we have internally about valuing this, but not that.
And wanting to be something other than what we are. We can't find awakening, nirvana, peace, love somewhere else. It's here. So is it time, Dojin, to switch, or should we, is there a last talk, a question someone wants to make?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jisho?
Yeah. Hi, Holly.
Well, I wanted to ask, lately, maybe just make the comment, lately I've had this interest in what birds do in their spare time. Like they're either flying around and getting food, but they're not always getting food. What do they do?
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I hurt my knee recently, and as a result, I've been sitting on a chair looking outside, and there's this big shrub we have, and there is this hummingbird that place is his outpost. And so I've been watching, and every day I look out the window, that's his place, which is like, real, he'll fly off and then he'll come back. And it really helped me see that that's his thing. There isn't a past, there isn't a present. He's just doing his wonderful thing. He's not trying to be productive or anything. And that just made me think about what you were saying, that I didn't have to strive to be productive all the time, which I do.
He is, on the other hand, striving to feed himself all the time, because unlike many birds, the hummingbird has to feed very, very, very often. And the other thing is that, just like us, they're very territorial. It's one of the more territorial birds. They'll drive all the other hummingbirds away that want to feed off that lovely shrub, even though it has plenty of flowers for all. So we all have our karma, our ways of being. But I wonder about, where do birds go when they're done feeding at the feeder? Where do they go hang out? And do they sleep in the same place every night? Questions like that.